In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. All right, so in a moment I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the religion of Islam. But first I want to tell you a little funny story. Not so much about Islam, but it is about sort of interfaith interactions. So there was this really bad traffic accident. Two people collided into each other, pretty well totaled their cars. They managed to pull themselves out of the rubble and discovered that neither of them had been injured in any way. And so the one was a Catholic priest and the other was a rabbi. And the Catholic priest says to the rabbi, "Were you hurt at all? Are you okay?" And the rabbi says, "Well, yeah, I think so. I think I'm all right." And then he noticed the collar on the priest, and he says, "Are you, by some chance, a Catholic priest?" And the priest says, "Oh, yes, I am, of course, yeah." And he says, "Well, that's quite a coincidence. I'm a rabbi." I think maybe the way that we have met, the fact that we have collided together and have done so without harm, maybe that's a sign that we're supposed to be friends. And live in peace with each other for the rest of our lives. And the priest said, "Yeah, maybe it is a sign." And the rabbi said, and there's another miraculous thing that's happened. I have a full bottle of wine on the front seat of my car, and it wasn't damaged at all in the accident either." And the priest said, that really is amazing. And the rabbi says, "I have a suggestion. Why don't we open the wine and have a drink together in celebration of the fact that neither of us were injured, and to give thanks for our future friendship." The priest said, "That sounds like a great idea." So the rabbi reaches in his car, takes out the bottle of wine, opens it, hands it to the priest. The priest downs about half of it and hands it back to the rabbi. And the rabbi, quite puzzlingly, starts to put the cap back on the bottle. And the priest says, "Well, wait a minute, Rabbi, I'm confused. I thought you said we'd have a drink together in celebration of our being safe and future friendship." And the rabbi says, "Well, yeah, I'm going to have that drink in just a moment, but I want to wait till the police get here and file their report." Little interfaith mischief going on there. So over the Christmas break, I was doing what I guess we always do this time of year, thinking about the year to come. And one of the questions I asked myself was, what are the topics or the categories of topics that we should probably try to tackle together, try to explore together as a faith community during 2016. And one of those kind of category of topics has to do with interfaith understanding, us developing our knowledge of other world religions other than our own. And in particular, perhaps most urgently, would be to develop our understanding of Islam. Now, I have a confession to make. I'm not proud of this, but the truth is that it wasn't until 9/11 and then all of the things that have been done and said since then, over this past decade, with our sort of national attention on terrorism and our occupation with Islam, it wasn't until that I really had any interest in Islam. I mean, I can't say I was already a deep student of Islam before all of this happened. But as I stand here before you today, I can't really think of a topic that is more relevant and more important to us than an understanding of Islam. Not in today's context. Now, I'm going to guess that few of you are scholars of Islam as well. I mean, maybe some of you have been studying Islam and diving into the literature, doing what you can to understand it. but probably most of us are not. I've read one book on it, started another, read articles here and there over time, but my guess is that most of us have an understanding of Islam that is really kind of like a collage, if you will, of different pieces, different bits of impressions and information that we've gathered over the years from the media. We have, seen a story over here, maybe read an article over here in the newspaper, heard someone on one of the media stations talking about Islam from a particular standpoint, and we've cobbled all of these bits and pieces together, and that collage is our understanding of Islam. I imagine that's probably the majority of us. I'm pretty sure it's the majority of Americans. And the problem with our collage approach to the subject is legion, of course, but one are the sources. Our source is coming from people with a sensationalist need to sell lots of stuff to us. That is, news media needs to always try to go for, the old saying in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, right? It's that idea that we always want to look for the sensational in order to talk about that, because then people will tune into our program. That's one of the problems, is our source is that industry. The other problem is that the way we cobble these bits and pieces together may lead to a distortion, so that we think we understand something that we're actually maybe clueless about. Okay? So I think it's way past time for us to get busy trying to educate ourselves, trying to do our own homework, if you will, and learn what we can learn from reading the scholars, the academics on Islam, rather than what we're getting from cable news. So the question before us is, what does it look like, what does it mean for us to follow Jesus into Islam? What does it mean, what does it look like for us to follow Jesus into the heart of the Muslim community? And just for clarification, a Muslim is a follower of Muhammad, it's a devotee of Islam, just like a Christian is a follower of Jesus, okay? So whenever you hear me refer to the term Muslim, I'm talking about a disciple of Muhammad, a person devoted to Islam. So that's the question before us. What will it mean for us? What will it look like for us to follow Jesus into the Muslim community? I thought a good way to get started with this would be to read a small portion of an article written by a woman by the name of Kim Lawton. Now, Kim Lawton is the managing editor of Religion and Ethics News Weekly on PBS. For those of you that are up and ready for church by 6:30 on Sunday morning, Religion and Ethics News Weekly comes on every Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. on your PBS station. I watch it, pardon the expression, religiously. I get a lot out of it. I think it's a really good program. And so Kim Lawton's the managing editor of that program, and she wrote an article back last September based upon her experience in Malaysia. And the title of the article is, "Do Muslims Have an Exclusive Claim on Allah?" Do Muslims have an exclusive claim on Allah? So I'm going to read a little portion of that, and then we're going to talk about it together, okay? Quote, Islam is the official religion of the Malaysian Federation, although the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion for every person. It also defines all ethnic Malays as Muslim. In 1986, Christian organizations first started receiving letters informing them that they were forbidden to use certain religious words, including Allah. The letters came as political parties were vying for conservative Muslim votes. Some Muslims were offended that Christians were using their word for God. 2008, the Malaysian Home Ministry officially banned non-Muslim use of Allah. Christians took the case to court, arguing that the word Allah had been used for centuries in Malay language Christian prayer books and Bibles. After a protracted legal battle, in January of just this last year, 2015, Malaysia's highest court dismissed a final appeal from the Catholic Church, meaning that Allah may not be used by non-Muslims. The central government issued a statement asserting that the ruling only applies to the specific institution which brought the suit in the first place. But other groups have requested clarification. The court said that Allah is not an integral part of Christianity. Father Andrew, a Catholic priest, told us, "It's laughable. You cannot say God is not an integral part of our religion. There is no other word for it, period," close quote. Now, a cursory reading of this article and of the issue itself functions in a way that is all too common in our culture. If you don't read the article carefully, you'll say, "Aha, there they go again. Those Muslims, those followers of Muhammad, they're rigid and cruel and violent in their basic orientation, and yet here's another example: Christians are being persecuted by these despicable Muslims." But let's hit the brakes before we go there, before we allow this article to confirm those kinds of ideas running in our mind. Let's hit the brakes and actually look at what the article says. And then we'll probably say a little bit more than that, knowing me. First of all, you'll notice that the article states very clearly, I don't know if you caught it or not, but the article states that this move to restrict the use of the word Allah to the Muslim community alone, after it had been used by Christian and Jewish communities in Malaysia for centuries, occurred as a part of a political movement. The thing that makes a right-wing government right-wing, or the thing that makes a right-wing politician right-wing, one of the things, is the propensity, the tendency to, I don't know if this is the right word to use, pick on or to, in worst case scenario, demonize, certainly to try to exclude, to set apart, to be suspicious of, to mistrust minority groups. Okay? So what we have here is a right-wing group of politicians who are doing their right-wing thing. They are saying, look, these minority groups can't be trusted. They're not us. They're not who we are. They don't look like us. They don't sound like us. Therefore, they should be treated with suspect. Now, after I read this, I got to digging around just a little bit, and I found out that this move to the right has been occurring in Malaysia since the 1970s. A lot of it's economics, and this may sound familiar to you. The economics of it is that there is a demographic shift happening in Malaysia, so that there are more and more Chinese-oriented Malaysians that are gaining ground and gaining political power in Malaysia, and this is seen as threatening to the status quo. So part of the reaction has been to pass policies and regulations that restrict this minority group that's gaining in strength. The important thing for our conversation this morning is to simply note that this idea occurs to restrict non-Muslims from referring to God as Allah. That idea pops up in 1970. Okay, you with me? Now, Christianity came to Malaysia 500 years earlier, or at least 450 years earlier. The first Catholic missionaries arrived in Malaysia in 1511. So then we get to ask ourselves a pretty straightforward question. What makes the most sense to you? Possibility number one, Muslims have never wanted non-Muslims to refer to God as Allah. It just took them 450 years to notice. Or possibility number two is that this has nothing to do with Islam and is a political manipulation by the hands of a few in order to gain political power. Now hold on to that question because there's a bit more to add. Let's look at the term Allah itself. Maybe there's something embedded in the term Allah that would make us think that this is some other creature or deity other than the God of the Christians or the God of the Jews. Well, the word Allah, and you may want to, if you're really interested in this, it gets a little tiny bit technical when you get into the etymology, the origins of ancient religious terms. But essentially, here's the deal. The term Allah goes back about 2,000 to 3,000 years. The root of the word Allah is the same root word, and this root goes back, it's a Semitic term that goes back about 2,500 years, and it is the same root, it's the same root that is expressed in Hebrew as El. In fact, Allah is the Allah, the God. So the plural form of this root in Hebrew is Elohim. Okay? Elohim is the name that for God that would have been used by the writers, the people who were alive during the time of Abraham and shortly thereafter. Okay? So the Jewish God Elohim and the Muslim God Allah share the same root word. In other words, they're pointing to the same reality. Allah is Arabic, Elohim is Hebrew. They're pointing to the same reality. Now, does that mean there are differences in the way the Hebrews have speculated about ultimate reality versus the way that Muslims speculate about ultimate reality? Well, yeah, there are some differences, but there are also some real commonalities. What are you going to focus on? So, Allah, Elohim, which is the term that Jesus would have been in Aramaic. It's a term that's a derivative of Elohim. Jesus would have known that God by that name. So, in closing, if you put together the piece that we talked about with respect to the politics and economics in Malaysia, you connect that to the piece about the common root word shared by Allah and Elohim, and you wed that to the fact recognized by everyone. This really isn't disputed very much, except maybe in fundamentalist circles, and that is that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they all trace their roots in their roots in faith back to the faith of Abraham. All three of the great monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, claim Abraham as their father in faith. So you put all that together, and what you're left with is a fairly clear message that what's going on in Malaysia is not a product of any kind of deep understanding of Islam. What's going on is a group of nefarious politicians are playing on the religious illiteracy and theological naivete of the masses in order to manipulate them for political purposes. That's what's going on. That's a familiar story in history, isn't it? That happens over and over and over again. You get a politician that wants to appeal to our basic fundamental prejudices, our fear, our mistrust of the different, the other, and ties that to some not very critically deep theological language, and all of a sudden you get religious justification for bad behavior. That's what's going on. Now, you'll say, well, thank God that doesn't happen in Christianity. Just this morning, I saw an article about a political science professor at Wheaton College in Illinois. Wheaton is a Christian fundamentalist school, who is going to be fired this week, in all likelihood. Why? Why is she going to be fired? Because she said publicly that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. From people that ought to know better. Okay, so the question for us today is, what does it mean for us to follow Jesus into the Muslim community? I would like to suggest in closing that it probably looks something like this. Treat your Muslim brother and sister the way you would want to be treated. And never do to a Muslim that which you would not want done to yourself. Okay, we're going to talk about this a lot more. I'm not going to talk about it every week, but all through the year we will come back repeatedly to this topic as we try to learn and try to separate the distortions about Islam from the real religion of Islam. Okay? Thank you for being here. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.